Hello and welcome to the EnSpirit podcast, where we inspire you to develop and enhance your entrepreneurial talents and skills. This series is packed full of information, tips and interviews that help you change and find the edge in your game. I'm your host, Beju Solanki. I'm a performance psychologist and I've been working with entrepreneurs and business owners for the last 25 years, helping them improve their game. To find out more information about me, please look on all social media platforms, but specifically Clubhouse and Instagram. Before we launch this week's episode, I'd love to tell you about the Change Your Game Scorecard. If you're struggling to achieve what you really want and you're not sure where to start, the Change Your Game Scorecard will help you identify where you need to improve. Life is a game, and there are 3 core games you need to conquer to succeed in life. That's the inner game, your mindset, your emotions, your thoughts. Your game plan, that's your strategy and your roadmap. And then your outer game, how consistent and persistent you are in taking actions. The Change Your Game Scorecard will help you identify how strong you are in each of those games. Please visit changeyourgamescorecard.com for more information and get your report today. Thank you for listening. Hi and welcome to the next EnSpirit podcast. And I'm delighted to welcome Dr. John Mervyn-Smith. How are you doing, John?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
No, you're welcome. Very, very welcome. Really excited about our conversation today. Now, for people who don't know, John, you're a true psychologist. I'm a psychologist, but you're a true psychologist. I would say, you know, you practice it day in, day out. We met several years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago, in your capacity of the founder of the GC Index. But what I'm really excited about today is some of the things that you've experienced in your life. But my first question is, how did you get into psychology? What was your story to get into this discipline?
Let me start by saying that this is a new experience for me, talking about myself. As you probably well know, psychologists are great at getting other people to talk.
Yeah.
Talking about themselves is a different thing altogether. So there's a touch of apprehension. So it's psychology. Well, I think it started when I was asked to leave school at 17. I'd lost my way a bit, and the message was, I think you ought to leave school, otherwise we might ask you to leave. And I think looking back, that shaped me a good deal in terms of thinking about myself, reflecting upon what had gone wrong, thinking about lost opportunities and so on. And I drifted for a while until I went to university to study psychology, probably on the back of that experience, thinking about individual differences, what motivates people, what doesn't motivate people, and so on. And university was such an affirming experience. It was the first time in my life that I had the experience of someone believing in my modest talents. Tutor Bill Mitchell, and I always think back and think fondly of Bill and think here was someone. I hope most people listening will have had that experience. Here was someone who believed in me. Very powerful experience that took me through my university days and on to do a PhD.
Did you find psychology and the understanding of it came easy to you?
Well, listen, I'm the youngest of 3 children. I grew up watching my family in some fairly complex dynamics. Well, I think very early on, I was thinking or asking those questions that a psychologist might ask, but obviously without the same level of sophistication. So yeah, I was curious. I felt that I had an understanding of people that I could build upon and shape and develop.
So you took the degree. As many people I know who study in psychology but never pursue it, they go into very different things, marketing or sales or something completely different. But you stayed in that lane. Yeah,
I did. I had questions. I had questions that I needed to explore, and that took me on to do my PhD. And that was 3 glorious, looking back, probably self-indulgent years doing research and asking questions, and I was curious about that stuff. And then later went on to train as a clinical psychologist, because that's where my curiosity took me. Understanding people who were struggling with the world in a different way, and wanting to help. So yeah, it feels like a fairly obvious journey looking back.
So when you did your clinical psychology, did you do that within an organisation? Was that?
Yeah, it was another example of feeling believed in. I think that's a powerful theme in my life. I was taken on to an NHS training scheme in southeast London, very competitive, a bit naive at the time, I think, and a guy called Fraser Watts and a woman called Kate Cutler again felt that I would thrive in that world. So yeah, two key people in my career.
So, but you didn't stay. I know that you've also run your own consultancies. You've done your own thing. Was that something that sort of you fell into? Was that something that you planned to do?
I was in the health service for some years, and I think my need to question. It got me into trouble on a number of occasions, and I would have run-ins with psychiatrists for asking the wrong sort of questions or challenging in the wrong way, and it became sadly something of a toxic environment for me, and I could see myself burning out. I got huge how do I put it, energy from working with my clients in the health service, but the system itself was wearing me down. And I did, and went into the world of consulting. Once again, I look back on a guy. There were a couple of them. Chris Kiddy was significant in taking me into his organisation and giving me an opportunity. It's interesting as I talk about it, but it just feels like I've been lucky along the way to just come across some great people who were prepared to take a chance.
Do you think, people talk about luck, and there's a lot of psychology behind luck, that it isn't just random as you create it. So you talk about luck there, but do you feel that luck occurred because you were in the right place and were accepting of an opportunity?
Yeah, there's probably a bit of that. I think certainly in the Western world at the minute, we're discouraged, aren't we, from thinking about luck. We're supposed to believe that everything that happens is of our own making. And maybe it's a bit of both, who knows. But yeah, I've been fortunate then, let's say, to be in the right place at the right time, and with some very talented folk who've given me opportunities.
So when you started your consultancy, was there trepidation? Was there fear of thinking, how do I actually make money out of this? How do I position myself?
Well, I was 40, coming up to 40. 40 is a funny age. People do always look for things around that age. In terms of changing their lives, I had 3 young kids that wanted to know that I wanted to do my own thing. I wanted to have that experience of doing it. And again, at the time, I think a lot of people say, oh, gosh, you've got a good job, why don't you do it? It's safe. And all of that didn't really occur to me at the time. I just thought we need to go off and try something different, and teamed up. My first business partner, a very talented individual. I learned a lot from him in different ways. And since that age, I've started a series of businesses. Some of them have worked, some of them have fallen by the wayside, but all of them interesting experiences.
And I want to delve a bit more deeper in that as well. John, I just did that because the sound is coming in and out. I don't know whether your mic is not connected, but it sort of comes in and out. Have you got mic on your actual headphones?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Is that better? Sorry.
Yeah. What did you do different?
I just pressed the jack a bit harder.
Yeah, I think you need, if you're going to keep hold of the jack in there, because maybe the connection, because it was going really fading for a moment.
Do you want to go again? Have you lost some?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
So I've done it. So it's only about 3 minutes. It's fine.
All right.
Unless you feel actually that might be better, because it was the last minute. It was really just dropped.
Yeah,
The volume just dropped.
I don't want to mess your quality up.
Okay, let's just go again. It's only about 4 minutes in, so we'll just stop and start again.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. What I'll do is I'm not going to delete that. We'll just start again. So I'll show that to the podcast guy, see if he feels that he's got 2 versions there. So and the phone, just leave the phone recording. Don't worry about stopping. He can edit that, so he can know. So all right. So we're going to start this. Okay, this is version 2. We'll go again from the start. Welcome to the next On Spirit podcast. My name is Beju Solanki. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. John Mervyn-Smith. How are you, John?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Beju. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this.
No, not a problem. I'm really excited about today's conversation. We met several years ago in your capacity of the GC Index profile, which we'll talk about later on. But I call myself a psychologist, but you're a true psychologist because you actually practice it. You've done the PhD and all the rest of it. And so and you've done so many things in your life as well, which I've come across in our conversations over the last several years. But for the viewers who don't know, how did you get into psychology? What was the initial interest?
Beju, before I start, let me just say, you'll appreciate this. Psychologists are usually good at getting other people to talk. So this is an unusual experience, one that I welcome, but an unusual experience for me, Indeed. Nonetheless, talking about myself and reflecting upon the story, really. So I think you're going to pose some interesting questions. Anyway, psychology. I was on the verge of getting thrown out of school. I was asked to leave, but effectively the message was, "You're not doing very well. You ought to move on." I'd lost my way as a 17-year-old. I was drifting, and they were difficult times. And I think I did reflect a lot on that experience of what had gone on, what I could have done differently, and so on. And so I was drawn to thinking about people and individual differences and spent some time before I went to university reading around psychology. I had questions about human beings and human nature. So I think psychology was a good fit for me. So went off to university, and it was interesting. It was my first experience. People talk about this a lot, and I think many of our audience will have had this experience, I hope. But it was my first experience of having a relationship with someone who believed in me, a guy called Bill Mitchell, one of my tutors, who believed in my modest talents and encouraged me to do a PhD. But very, very powerful point in my life. It's interesting. I often because now that I have done in recent years, spent a lot of time profiling candidates, interviewing candidates for jobs. And one of the questions I often ask is, were your parents proud of you, or are your parents proud of you? And people usually say, they'll say yes or no. And then I'll say, does that matter to you? And people invariably say that it does, whether they're in their 40s, 50s and 60s, that notion that there's someone who believes in you, takes a pride in you is powerful, I think. Sorry, I've gone off.
No, that's great. That's perfect, because sometimes you need that, because it's sort of not just validation, but it just gives you that little kickstart and say, yeah, I'm on the right path.
It does. And I mean, there's so much written on management and leadership these days, but you know, effective managers will invest in people and believe in them.
And what was your PhD in?
Yes, I was interested in how people label emotions. So there you are, you're at Alton Towers. I don't know whether it's open now, but you're at Alton Towers, and you're at the top of that massive drop. There's a name for it, isn't there? And some people will feel excited and some people will feel terrified, and yet the physiological experience may be very much the same. So I was interested in individual differences when it came to how people label their physiological changes, what emotional terms they use for what they're experiencing. Sorry, that's probably the simple way of putting it, but yeah.
No, I think that's fantastic. So then you went into clinical psychology.
So I did the PhD, and I was interested in this guy Bill Mitchell again. So he used to tutor us on what sadly in those days was called abnormal psychology. I'm sure it's not called that these days, but so one week it will be a tutorial on schizophrenia, and the next week it would be on depression and so on, and every week, whatever the symptoms were that he was describing, I had it. So I would leave that classroom thinking, right, I've got OCD, or I've got this, or I've got that. So I became absolutely fascinated with that world of emotional well-being and mental health, and still am. And I was drawn to helping people in that setting, and joined a scheme, an NHS scheme in the Southeast Thames, and again felt very supported by a woman called Kate Cutler, who was very affirming, and I felt believed in by her. So that was a good move for me. So I spent some years in the NHS.
I see. Now I know you also you have run a few consultancies, and you've worked in other areas outside of the lab, if you like. How long were you working with the NHS?
It must have been about eight years, I think. I mean, it came to an end, sadly, because I mean, there's a theme here, in the sense that my questioning nature was getting me into trouble. So I had a series of run-ins with psychiatrists and different viewpoints on the management of people.
Right.
And much as I love my work, really loved my work, the system was beginning to wear me down, and I knew that I was going to burn out at some point. So I had to bail out and move on.
And was it scary for you to, because although I think a lot of people can relate to you being in a certain place for such a long time that it doesn't serve you, but you're afraid of the unknown, afraid to moving on. So was there fear of leaving that and going on your own and to do a consultancy?
Do you know that there wasn't? I don't, and it's an interesting question, because the way you frame it, you think that that's an obvious thing, wouldn't you? I don't think that I've ever been fearful of failure, and that's not because I assume that things will be successful. I just see it as another experience, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, then something else will present itself. So the timing felt right, and I was offered a great opportunity by a guy called Chris Kiddy down in Bristol, and again felt believed in by him, given an opportunity, and just well supported, and found myself thriving in the world of occupational psychology.
I think it's a good lesson there for people who are thinking of they might be going through some change in relation to whether it's a career change or otherwise, whereby not to be fearful of it, but to see it's a different stage and a new opportunity.
Yeah, looking back, I think it was very clear that I had a lot of transferable skills that I could take from the NHS. And I kept retained friendships with a number of people in the NHS afterwards, and it saddens me that they don't recognise their talents. They don't see what they could bring to another world because they often don't feel valued in that world. Hopefully that will and is changing as a result of COVID-19. We'll see.
Indeed. Yeah, we were recording this sort of during the pandemic and the lockdown, and we'll refer to that later on, even though this podcast could be listened at any time. So let me ask you, when you went in your consultancy, did you know what direction? Was it in the corporate world? Was it some other domain? What was the area that you started to run your consultancies?
Well, I suppose given my background, it was fairly natural for me to think about coaching. And so that one-to-one relationship, having an impact in a different setting, was where I felt comfortable. So I think it was building upon my academic work and my clinical work that I felt that I had the basics for understanding people, assessing, understanding, profiling, and helping through a coaching relationship.
How did you find your clients? How did you because there's one part of where you're good at doing the thing, and I think a lot of people who are listeners can relate to that. They're good at the thing, but then there's the business aspect of it. How you make money. How did you find your?
Oh, I see what you mean. Oh, right, okay. Do you know, I've always taken the view that if you do something well, if you're reasonably good at something, the money will follow. Sounds a bit naive, doesn't it? But,
sometimes naivety can get you through.
Yeah, and we've taken that approach to some extent with the GC index. Probably we're a bit more serious about it now, but there is that sense of, if you've got a service to offer and you offer it well, and you do the best you can do for your clients, then, money sort of happens.
Do you believe? Did you have complete belief in yourself during that time?
I have belief. That's an interesting question. I've always seen, again, working with individuals or groups, I've always seen it as a journey that's shared and that you sort of learn together along the way. And if you set it up like that, then the bumps and the mistakes, people forgive each other. And if there's an intent to get to a better place together, then that can often be achieved. Does that answer your question? I believed in a process, I think, rather than necessarily believing that I had a particular skill set. I believed that if you get the relationships right, create a foundation, there's an openness to understanding issues and challenges and problems and aspirations and ambitions, then it's possible to get somewhere better.
You mentioned you ran several different consultancies. What were the areas?
Serial consultancies.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I started the Oxford Consulting Group to begin with. More recently, established a consulting firm called Missouri Consulting. I mean, there's been a string of them. Some of them have worked well and been successful. Some of them haven't worked so well. If I'd understood GC index then as I do now, then there may have been a chance of saving some of those businesses. But it wasn't to be.
You've mentioned GC index a couple of times. We are going to come on to that later on. So let me ask you this: with your failures, what did you learn?
Do you know, it's it's hard to frame them as failures. I think I've gone through life thinking that nothing is forever. Do you know, things end, things come to an end, and that's nature's way. You know, and it's true of businesses. They start, they grow, they fade, they die, and I'm quite comfortable with that. And I can think of some of the businesses where I just felt, I'm ready to move on. I'm not making the contribution that I would want to. The business has outgrown me. Those sorts of things, and it felt like more natural endings rather than failures. I think.
You seem quite pragmatic around that.
Yeah, I think I probably am actually. Yeah, I'm not one to look back overly with regret. Of course, it would be daft not to take some learning out of those experiences. You learn what you are and you learn what you aren't. I mean, I learned very early on that I didn't particularly want to manage people. So if I'm to be successful, having self-sufficient folk around me works well. But yeah, I didn't have the energy to go to any lengths to make a business work.
So one thing I'm really excited to talk about, which I discovered as a passing conversation during our years, is you were the or one of the psychologists on Big Brother.
I was, yes, and a few others, a few other of those reality.
Were you now? What were the other programs?
Is it? There was one
Love
about,
Island.
There's one about eating.
I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here?
No. Oh gosh, you've caught me out, Beige. Do you know what? I confess I never watched them.
No, oh no.
No, my role was to interview possible candidates for the show and reassure the producers that they would be able to cope with it. I still have relationships with some of the producers, great people, very talented in their own way. And I'll tell you what, the ones that I work with, just hugely conscientious about their duty of care. But they were interesting, and I don't want to anticipate your questions, but I think here I was working with a very different population in the health service. You know, in the days when we used to call them patients, it was that population who was struggling at a particular point in their lives. In the world of corporates, some very talented, ambitious, successful people. And here we were with reality shows. And the biggest thing that struck me is just how resilient some of these folk were. I know there have been some very high profile crashes, but by and large, the people I talked to, I just used to sit there in admiration and think, blimey, you've gone through some stuff in your life. And, you know, as Elton would say, you're still standing. So it felt like a privilege in many ways to be part of that. What was the one where they had grandparents and grandkids on a spring break? I remember doing that.
Oh, what, with 4-year-olds with the 80-year-olds?
Yeah. What was that one? Anyway, yeah. But that was
where they have 4-year-olds in a room with 80-year-olds.
No, I think it's teens and grandparents go off on.
Okay.
Yeah, but anyway, there have been so many of them. But
so my first question around that is, how did you get that gig? What was the first one? What was the first gig you got, and how did you get it?
My world is relatively small. That there aren't many sort of hybrid psychologists, people who've been academics and clinicians and then the world of work. And we tend to, we've over the years we've tended to keep contact, and that's how those sort of introductions were will happen. So it will be folk that I've known.
Just part of the
years.
networks,
It
someone you get an
is.
introduction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And were you fascinated about why people wanted to put themselves, bare their lives in front of millions on TV?
Well, I suppose I was, because that's not, I'd find this difficult, let alone being on a reality show. So, I mean, it's, yeah, yes, it is. It is a question, isn't it? It is a fascination. I'm not sure I've got an answer.
I'm fascinated. You said that you never watched it, so you did an assessment on an individual, and you said to the producer, "Yeah,
Made in Chelsea was the other one. I think.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, that's quite, isn't that? Yeah.
Well,
sorry,
I've never watched it, but I've heard of that one.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
The reality, yeah. But I'm fascinated that you did these assessments on these individuals, and you spoke to the producer and said, "I think they will be fine." But then I would be fascinated. I'd watch the program just to see was what I thought the way they could cope. Has that come to fruition? But that was not...
my hunch has been actually that the person on the telly isn't the person I was talking to. That there's always an element of performance, and I would sit down with them for a couple of hours and more, and know them. And I was happy that felt that I knew them. I was less interested in watching them perform for the cameras, really.
Okay, good. So, as we mentioned before, I've known you through being introduced to the GC Index. And the GC Index stands for the Game Changer Index. But I'm fascinated about how this came about, because it wasn't some plan. It's a profiling tool for those who don't know. It wasn't some plan where you sit down, we need to create another profiling tool. It was through some passing conversations and comments with some corporate work that you were doing.
Yeah. We call it the Game Changing Index now, to take the emphasis. So I'll explain a bit more of that in a minute. So my business partner is Nathan Ott, and we created the GC Index together. And Nathan worked in the world of search, and some of his clients were saying, find people for us who can drive transformational change. And he came to me because I was doing a lot of profiling at the time, and his question was, tell us what these folk are like. Give us an understanding of how we recognize them and select them, and so on. And when we sat down and talked about it, it was clear that we didn't really have a clue. But there was an interest nonetheless in doing a piece of research to ask the question, what are these folk like? Do they exist in a corporate setting? We tag them as game changers, so that's where that comes from. And it was interesting because I think Nathan strongly believed in our collective ability to answer those questions. I was just the academic, really, doing the research, bringing some sort of rigor to that question, and that's where the journey started. And I think,
And what was the premise? What was the question that you looked to either prove or disprove?
So it was, do these individuals, game changers, exist? I mean, it just seems like a daft question now. It's so obvious to us. But more interestingly, if they do they have defining characteristics? That was at the heart of it. Characteristics that could shed some light on these individuals, how to understand them, how to motivate them, how to select them, and so on. So it tapped into the purist in me, the academic who wanted to ask and answer those questions, and that's how the journey began, and it's continued. 2012, did I say that? Yeah, that's where it all.
So did you start from the premise of, well, we believe game changers have these characteristics, and let's look to see if that's the case, or was it? How did you?
No, it was a
How
blank. This is getting a bit nerdy, Beju. It was
Yes,
a blank.
people are fascinated by nerdy things. What
Well,
they like, what I find is people sometimes like to know the juice behind what looks good, and I'm sure that once people listen to this podcast, they're going to go and look up the GC index, which I want them to do.
right.
What was the?
Well, yeah. Do you know? Yeah. It wasn't. Oh, I've got an idea. Let me prove it. I don't like that approach to research, because I think it's contaminated from the outset, and there's too much of that goes on. I have an idea. Let's gather the data to say how right we were all along. So we simply, I say simply. It was a large scale study, sitting people down who've been around in the corporate world and in a very systematic way, gathering data from them around the questions of what's your experience been of these folk? Have you worked with them? Without giving them any sorts of definitions, and just saying, if you work with game changers, okay, give us your views. What are they like? What characteristics do they have? Now, if you ask a big sample of people, sooner or later, hopefully, you will get a convergent view statistically. And that's what emerged. What came out from that was that our game changers had qualities of creative imagination and obsession. So some quite distinct characteristics. They think differently. They think in ways that psychology doesn't have a clue about at the moment. Hopefully we will in time, but our understanding of intelligence and creativity is actually still very crudely limited.
It is, and when I first came across it, being in the psychology game, I've seen most of the profiles out there, and when I first saw it, I thought, oh, it's probably just some pop psychology profiling tool you see at the back of a magazine. But then I came to one of the accreditation meetings that Nathan was. And the more he talked about it, I was like, hang on, this is different. This is so different. It's not just about a premise, like you say. You weren't looking to prove something. You were looking to investigate, to see. And I remember the moment when he said that, as you mentioned, highly imaginative and highly obsessive were the two core characteristics of a game changer. And then how the tool developed, and identifying strategists and implementers and polishers and playmakers.
I think too, just listening to you tell that story, I think if we'd started off in that more traditional, here's an idea, let's prove it, we'd have ended up with another measurement of personality.
Yeah.
And the GC index isn't. What it measures is energy for impact. Where people's energy is when it comes to making a contribution at work. And to your earlier question of me moving on from businesses, I've always had this real dread of outstaying my welcome. And it's true in businesses. If I don't feel I'm making a contribution, I can't hang around. It just feels, I don't know what it is. There's something morally wrong with hanging around, taking the paycheck when you're not making a contribution. Now, that's about me, but I think it's about all of us. All of us go to work to make a contribution and hope that it's valued. No one goes to work to feel incompetent. And the GC index is a way of giving people insight and awareness into where their energy is, how they want to make an impact, and how they can maximize that impact. So it's about doing rather than being. It's not traditional personality as we know it.
And I would encourage anybody listening to this, if they even find the slightest interest in it, is go and research, look up the GC index, and it is a fascinating tool, and I love it because, like you say, it doesn't measure personality, it measures your natural proclivity to make an impact in the world, which is fascinating. And I use that with my clients as well. We're recording this during this pandemic and this COVID period, which is fascinating. For me, it must be from you, from a psychology point of view, in terms of how people reacted to the pandemic, the lockdown, and everything that's come with it. What has this shown you about human behaviour?
Crikey, that's a broad question. You're absolutely right. I mean, this is like nothing I've ever experienced, and you'd have to be into your hundreds to remember the Spanish flu of whatever it was, 1918, that went on for 4 years. We're living through some exceptional times. There's so much. I've been interested in looking at certainly political leadership around the world and mapping it onto the GC index and seeing how leaders are being successful or not being successful. So leadership has been one theme that's fascinated me. How have people stepped up? I mean, there have been some standouts, we know. Angela Merkel for me, I'm going to use the framework, so forgive me those folk who don't know it, but as a strategist playmaker, in my view, has been exceptionally successful. Nicola Sturgeon, I think, has been standout for me. And there have been some extraordinary failures too. So that's been interesting. There's a theme of how people have coped with isolation and what it means to be resilient. When I draw upon my experience, there are three ingredients to resilience. One is about optimism. The other is about perceived resourcefulness. Am I able to cope with this world? And the third is about being connected. All of the studies show that when people are not connected, when they feel isolated, they're vulnerable. Resilience in part comes from feeling you're a part of something else. And so this has been a real test for people. And I just love the way communities have responded. That's been the uplifting and the inspiring thing, how communities have responded to helping isolated folk stay connected.
What has this period given you?
I think a lot of folk have said to me that they quite enjoy the space to sit and reflect and think away from the relentlessness of the world that we've created. I do wonder how widespread that is, but that's what it's given me. Just a chance to be peaceful, really, and reflect and think, and an excuse not to get caught up with the rushing around and the commuting and yeah.
What do you think the world will look like now, coming out of this period, and what opportunities do you think will occur as a result?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, just again thinking of the GC index, because someone had written an article about this the other day. But when the world is uncertain, in times of chaos, anything is possible. So it is a time for, there are opportunities for game changers. We've seen it, for people to step up with real creativity to reshape the world. Now, I'm not a game changer. That's not my profile. So you're asking me to be imaginative about a future world. I can't see it as clearly as some folk probably.
Do you know, I never asked you, what is your profile? I don't even know.
Yeah, no, I'm. We'll probably come on to it in a minute, but I'm a strategist and a polisher. So a very academic profile. I like to have ideas and I like to think things through, and I tend to get a bit picky about things. And but yes, yeah.
In all of your life, what are you most proud of?
Well, my mother always used to say to me, pride comes before a fall. I didn't know a clue what she meant growing up. We never do we? When we hear these comments, but it's stuck somewhere in my head. I don't hang on to things in that way of pride. I feel fortunate. You know, you take the GC index and many other things I've done in my life, it wouldn't have happened without the relationships that were around me. That's true of all the successful businesses. I think if it hadn't been for that individual, this wouldn't have happened. So it's really quite hard to take pride in something like that when you know that it's the product of shared endeavour.
And you can see when you think of all the great things, even small things that have occurred in the world, it's never ever about one person doing one thing at one time.
Yeah.
You need other people. You need, if I didn't go, I remember I was working with Kethan, a good friend of ours, who's also another GCologist. He was having a meeting with someone else who knew about the GC index. I went to meet him and I crossed over with this person. And literally in passing, she just said to him, "Oh, don't forget about," and she must have said GC index. And I carried on my meeting. And then I just said, "Oh, what was that about?" Now, if I didn't cross over there, I'm not sure whether I would have been introduced to the GC index.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like these sliding door moments.
Yes.
And when I talk about proud, is sometimes if we can, for me, what the work you did with the Big Brother stuff, the work I'm sure you've done with the NHS and the stuff with it's things to be proud of. But we also recognise that we need other individuals, and I think I want people who are listening to this to understand that it's okay to be proud, but respect the individuals that are part of that journey.
Yes, I think that's right. Otherwise, you're creating some sort of an illusion that I don't think is healthy in an emotional sense.
And also, it avoids the pressure. He doesn't feel like for you to achieve anything, it's got to be all about you.
Yeah.
So it's good to be proud and recognise, I'm proud of that thing, but also it wouldn't be where it is without these people or that opportunity.
Yes, I think that's just the way that I see it. Yeah.
And part of the way I want this podcast to land on people is to encourage them to yes, like I asked you earlier about, do you believe in yourself? And actually, I believed in the process. And that's quite a powerful distinction, because again, that allows people not to put so much pressure on them.
Yeah.
And detach themselves. Actually, if I follow this process, I could get I could achieve what I need to achieve, as opposed to thinking, I haven't got the talent, or I haven't got the skill set, or I haven't got this. Yeah.
Well, I mean, thinking of parental influences, my father would often say, life is about experiences. It's more about the journey than the destination. And I think, being outcome driven, it's just a recipe for disappointment in some ways, because you never know that you're going to get there, and you'll have missed out on the treats along the way. But yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah, we all carry our own scripts in our heads, don't we? I suppose
we do. So what's next for John? What's next on the agenda for John?
Hopefully I'm still making a contribution to the GC index that's valued, and that's where my energy will be for some time. I think I'm still getting, it's taken me full. Let me give you a story. So I can talk about Vivian, because she's gone. I think we've got her on one of our broadcasts with her permission. So here's Vivian, a talented woman, working for the FA, for the Football Association. So in a very sort of masculine world. Now, Vivian did the GC index twice. The first time, she comes out with a moderate game changer profile, and then she did it again, and her game changer profile was even stronger. And I said, Vivian, what's going on here? Have you been faking it? GC index is incredibly difficult to fake, but that's another story. And she said no. She said, she said, the first time round, I recognised my talents. You helped me to recognise my talents, and I've just become increasingly confident in my creativity and imagination. Now, those stories where we help people to recognise their talents and indeed in some ways liberate them to express those talents, that is the thrill for me. You know, that all the while that I hear those stories, that we've helped someone along the way, recognizing talents, exploiting their talents, getting energy from doing that will sustain me.
John, it's been fascinating talking to you. Really enjoyed our conversation, how you work with the reality TV part, your role in the GC Index, and etc. And you know, I love our conversations, and what you bring to the party. So if people want to know more about your work and what you do, how can they find you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn if people want to come directly to me, and I'm more than happy for them to do that. But just Google the GC Index, and you can find me through the who are we bit. So yeah, happy to pick up any queries or conversations that people want to have.
Perfect, John. John, it's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. Really interesting, and I bid you goodwill, and I'll speak to you very soon. Take care.
Cheers, Beju. Thanks.
Thank you for listening. To find out more about myself or the Change Your Game Scorecard, you can visit changeyourgamescorecard.com, where you can find out how strong your game is and get a full detailed report. Also, if you found this episode useful, please do leave a rating or a review in iTunes to help others discover it too. Until the next time, my name is Beju Slanky.